Hello. In this recording from our Justia webinar, Taming High Performance Nightmares, a Leadership Survival Guide, Scott Mason teaches you how to survive one of the most treacherous traps a new lawyer leader might encounter, dealing with the toxic superstar. It also offers strategic and detailed practical tips tailored to both novice and seasoned lawyer leaders. Remember, if you want to see more Justia videos on law practice and legal marketing, be sure to subscribe to our channel.
So I am so glad to be back here before the folks here at Justia talking about a subject that is of absolute pivotal importance to anyone who is a lawyer stepping into or moving upward on a leadership pathway. How to deal with high-performing nightmares. This is a true leadership survival guide, and it addresses one of the most challenging, risky, but if resolved, empowering situations that a leader can ever face. Before we go into the real meat of this seminar, though, I want to begin with a little story that really illustrates exactly what this situation can look like and the dangers associated with it. Once upon a time, I was friends with another attorney who was the chief legal officer for a company in another city. And the company in this other city had as its chief operating officer, the second in command, a person who met all of the performance metrics that anyone would reasonably expect of someone in that position. In addition, due to the stature of professionally that COO had, as well as the sheer volume of the relationships that the COO had in that field, they were responsible for bringing in a significant amount of that company's revenues. But, and this is a big but, the COO was a nightmare to work with. The COO was known for throwing books and notebooks and pencils around the office, for screaming at people privately and publicly, for verbally abusing their peers, as well as making lower-level people cry, including the secretaries or the receptionists at the front door. This person's behavior was beginning to trigger a wave of departures by qualified staff people, or at least top-level staff people looking for another job. And there was additionally a lot of time being wasted by the staff that was remaining, gossiping and venting about the COO, rather than sitting at their works getting stuff done. My friend advised her company CEO that continuing to tolerate this behavior was putting his entire reputation and the reputation of his company at severe legal and reputational risk. The CEO heard my friend, but chose not to do anything. The COO brings in all of the revenue, my friend, the chief legal officer, was told. What am I to do? Our company cannot afford to lose the COO. The COO was a high-performing nightmare. And the chief legal officer's words came true when an article about shady dealings that had occurred with that COO later became the subject of a major newspaper article. That is a situation that I do not want anyone at this webinar, actually anyone who's a leader anywhere, to ever have to face. But that story and stories like it happen all the time. So my goal today is to make sure that it don't happen to you. What is a high-performing nightmare? For the purposes of this conversation, the high-performing nightmare is someone who performs according to all important KPIs or paper metrics in their job very, very well. But they are nonetheless, from an interpersonal or soft skill perspective, difficult to work with. Their social and emotional intelligence is low in a way that wreaks havoc everywhere that they go within an organization. And I'm focusing on them because the paper metrics that many lawyers and other technically oriented leaders can base management decisions on often ignore or make invisible the real financial and cultural impact of continuing to tolerate a high-performing nightmare within any team or other organizational environment. For attorneys in particular, though, tolerating or letting fester a high-performing nightmare within your team or organization has a much larger than life impact, particularly in comparison to leaders who are not attorneys. Why? Well, first of all, there are some ethical issues that pertain to attorneys specifically that the behaviors of high-performing nightmares can touch on that we're going to talk about literally in just a few minutes. Number two, accountability. As lawyers, we are perceived as being able to and almost expected to operate at a higher moral, ethical, intellectual, and all sorts of other levels than just some random leader. And in addition, if our behaviors cross any of those ethical lines, not only is there a larger public disappointment in us because of the elevated stature that we are perceived to have professionally as lawyers, but because of the risks that these behaviors can bring with regards to the ethical canons that I'm about to mention, and the fact that we could lose our licenses if those ethical canons are violated severely enough, or all sorts of other horribles can happen if we go through some sort of disciplinary process. And then also, for reasons we'll talk about throughout this, anytime someone's behavior is nightmarish or abusive due to anti-discrimination and in some jurisdictions even anti-harassment and bullying laws, there are legal risks associated with tolerating high-performing nightmares. And as lawyers, the public and the people who work for us will be particularly intolerant of us poorly managing legal risks within teams or organizations that we lead. And I think the reasons for that are obvious and they're completely reasonable. So, as lawyer leaders, the expectations upon us and how we lead and the modeling that we demonstrate to our teams and to the world as to our behaviors are high and only become higher the more we move up the ladder or the more successful as leaders we are. So how we manage high-performing nightmares not only impacts all of the above, but can, in fact, in certain circumstances, make or break our entire careers. Now, I mentioned earlier that there were some ethical considerations that high-performing nightmares implicate if we tolerate them. I'm going to list a few right here because we need to know what happens if we don't manage these situations and some touch points that can lead to much deeper, really, from a licensing perspective, consequential actions against us. I have based these ethical considerations on the ABA's model rules as of August 2024, which is when these materials were drafted. Of course, those always can be updated depending on when you watch this. You should also be aware of all local laws, rules, and regulations, as well as the ethical canons of any legal jurisdiction within which you are holding your license, which may be strict or vary or different in a whole host of ways. But these are some basic guide points. First of all, always think about rules 5.1 and 5.3, which go as to the supervision of other attorneys and staff under the aegis of any non-attorney, non-legal staff. And so the reason why I mention that is that tolerating passively just let happen or enabling harassment, abuse, discrimination, or all sorts of other behaviors that are associated with high-performing nightmares can put you crosshairs with these ethical requirements. In addition, Rule 8.4 is about maintaining integrity of the profession. If you are assisting misconduct, particularly misconduct that can ultimately be found to have a violation of any sort of laws, rules, or regulations embedded within it, then you are potentially behaving in violation of this rule. Furthermore, Rule 3.5 goes as to decorum with regards to being in court or tribunals. If the high-performing nightmare, for instance, is a litigator, and they are acting out during the course of a deposition, as I have seen happen, or if they are acting out during settlement conferences or in court itself. Again, this could not only implicate them from an ethical perspective, but going back to the supervision of those sorts of staff people, they may conceivably implicate you. And then finally, Rule 4.4, respect for the rights of third persons. If, for instance, you are the owner of a litigation firm and the staff, whether lawyer or non-lawyer, who is working for you is exhibiting their nightmarish behavior by engaging in behavior that is designed to embarrass, delay, or burden a third party, let's say a witness that's not involved in the litigation, then that goes as to respecting the rights of third parties as an ethical obligation, and it is a line that can be very, very dangerous to let someone cross. So with those ethical canons in mind, let's get back to why this course is so important, which is successful organizational leadership, whether it is a small team or a multi-regional enterprise, requires a very careful navigation of complex interpersonal relationships, as well as the ability to focus on closely achieving or exceeding the measures of performance that are usually financial or otherwise, and can make or break your job irrespective of the interpersonal issues going on. High-performing nightmares, thinking about these two things, really are difficult from a leadership perspective because they make navigating and treading the water between these two pillars particularly difficult. The uncontrolled high-performance nightmare takes away your focus on achieving these metrics-based outcomes. Focusing too much on the net metrics-based outcomes can cause you to ignore the interpersonal elements of being a leader. And so what they do is they literally catch you between Scylla and Charybdis. And it's something that only a very seasoned leader or someone who has taken the time and effort to think about how to manage such a situation can really properly put together and handle. Now, there are a couple of really interesting resources here that I want to point out before we move on. First of all, there is a concept in leadership thinking called leadership dependency, which states as a matter of guiding principle for leaders that no leader operates in an island. If no one is following you, you ain't a leader. And you won't be a leader for long if all of your followers desert you. Well, you might be leading yourself, but you won't be leading anyone else. You certainly won't be leading any team or organization. And so understanding that you as a leader are dependent on those you follow, not just yourself, really then makes it clear that managing the overall team, including those that might not be at the top or who might be viewed as quote unquote less indispensable than a high-performing nightmare, actually is a critical issue in the story I mentioned earlier. If the entire executive team of the CEO had quit, except the high-performing nightmare, his business wouldn't have been able to function. That's because he, as a leader, was dependent on those that he led. For a lot of detail about this, there's a fascinating and great article in Harvard Business Review that I have pointed you to, and I urge anyone who's interested in leadership to read about it. So, who exactly is this class for? First of all, if you are a lawyer seeking to grow your firm, or if you're just starting a firm and expect to scale and expand, you need to know about this because you're going to have a team, and you will almost certainly at one point or another face a high-performing nightmare within your firm. Number two, attorneys seeking to move into management or chief legal officer roles, either within a firm or in another organizational context. So you might want to be a general counsel, or you simply might be moving in your firm to a practice group leader. This is for you as well. And then finally, if you are seeking to build your leadership repertoire in contexts that have nothing to do with your job, but are still important to you, like if you're on a nonprofit board, or if you are in a volunteer organization, or hey, if you're just leading the local book club, all of these things can come into play that we're going to talk about today. Who am I? Nina gave me an introduction earlier, so I won't go into it again, except to say that my big commitment in life is to work with lawyers to become leaders worthy of Mount Olympus. That's what my whole coaching practice is about, and that's why I'm so committed to being here today and to sharing what I know with you and hoping to provide you some useful guidance. So, the agenda today at a high level: how and why great leaders get held hostage by toxic nightmare employees, number one. Number two, because toxic employees can threaten your organization, and with that threat, threaten your own credibility, both as a leader, as an attorney, and your career going forward, how you can begin to rebuild it. The honest truth is, I'll just say this right now, and this probably will be repeated later, if your staff has within its ranks a high-performing nightmare, the non-nightmare employees aren't blaming that high performer for the high performer's empowerment. They're blaming you. And you've lost credibility once that happens. So that's why number two is of such importance. Number three, how to build an action plan to revive your reputation, to bring back your moral authority, to build morale, and to deal with the high-performing nightmare. And then finally, we're going to go over some key takeaways. So, how and why do otherwise superstar leaders get held hostage by high-performing nightmares? Understanding why helps put you in a position where you can break the chains. Let's talk first about the concept of toxic myths. All of us exist within narrative arcs that include our past, who and what we are now, and our future. We operate, in other words, within professional stories, or what I call professional myths. These stories may or may not be factually true, because a lot of times they include things like perceptions and feelings and desires and ambitions. But they nonetheless, on a fundamental, in a mental and in a psychological and in an emotional sense, are very true. So, what your myth is about who you are, where you're going, will ultimately drive your professional outcomes. There is always at least one character in the myth or in the narrative of your life. And that character is or should be you. And the key to being able to successfully manage a high-performing nightmare is to navigate the specific type of toxic myth that usually empowers high-performing nightmares, as well as to look carefully at the roles within that myth that you are playing. And once you're able to do that, then we're able to move on and set the stage for rectifying the emergence of this person and their unfortunate dominance within your team or organization. The myth type that most frequently leads to the emergence of a toxic nightmare is the myth that I call, and it's a whole genre actually of myths that's out there in the world. Myths, just as an aside, part of why I use that term, are really cultural narratives that are merely the extension of the personal narratives of the individuals within the culture that has those myths. And so the larger cultural myths are correlated to internal myths. There's a whole genre, like I mentioned, of myths called doomsday myths. And they are in existence because individuals within those cultures, in one way or another, believe them. The doomsday myth occurs when you believe that your decisions or actions, except the most routine or non-threatening of them, will likely lead to disaster. In other words, it is a personal narrative myth that's rooted in fear of cataclysm. Telltale signs that you are living out the toxic doomsday myth is that you fear change, that loss is tantamount to disaster rather than opportunity. The CEO I talked about at the top of this hour was afraid of losing the toxic employee. Why? Because he was afraid that clients would leave. He didn't view it as an opportunity to be able to bring in new clients or to develop relationships that were not dependent on that toxic employee with those clients, or to look and explore with the clients as to whether they were aware that this person that had brought them into the orbit of this company, whether they themselves were aware of that employee's toxicity. They might have been and been holding their nose, but might have been happy to see such a toxic person go. He doesn't know because he didn't view it as an opportunity. The CEO didn't know because they didn't view it as an opportunity. Fear-based management simultaneously empowers the nightmare, but while it also drives away top employees. The best staff people that you ever have will never want to work in an environment dominated by fear. They like being inspired and motivated. They like feeling free and happy at work. And so if you are constantly afraid of cataclysm, you're going to be projecting that fear out onto your entire team, and your best people won't tolerate it for long. They will leave. Meanwhile, the toxic employee that knows that you're afraid of getting rid of them will understand that they have an undue balance of power in your relationship with them. And so their behavior will only get worse and worse and worse. So how do you know if you're living out this myth or someone that you're mentoring or around is living out this myth? You will hear words like, if so-and-so leaves, then so will all of our clients. Again, going back to the example I mentioned at the top of the hour. Or, oh my God, what if they sue us? Lawyers in particular can get wrapped up in that one. Well, again, there are ways to deal with potential lawsuits, and we can't operate as leaders without any risk whatsoever. If you're automatically jumping to an assumption that you're going to get sued and lose and all of this sort of stuff, you're probably living out the doomsday myth. Now, what are the roles in the myth that people can play which perpetuate this sort of cycle of doomsday fear thinking, and as well as general resistance to making the necessary changes to deal with the high-performance nightmare? First of all, the initial role that people can play is that of the victim. The victim is someone who is driven by events rather than being responsible for driving events. A leader that is playing a victim role appears helpless, even though they have the title of leader. And telltale signs of someone playing a victim role is, oh, it's not my fault. It's always someone or something else's fault. Circumstances led to this. I just can't help it. That's the way it is. It shows a lack of self-accountability. Self-accountability takes courage. Self-accountability involves being a hero. The victim is afraid to do that. Power abhors a vacuum. If staff or if the general dynamics of the leadership team have the person at the top viewing themselves as helpless, even if they're presenting otherwise, the toxic nightmare 100% is guaranteed to step in and assert power. And so you want to really make sure that that is not a role that you're ever playing. And I've given some examples of what that can look like at the bottom outside of the ones that I mentioned a few seconds ago. Another toxic role is that of the bystander. The bystander is a minor character in their own myth. there in the background. A classic leadership bystander is the stuffed shirt or the empty suit. And you see it played out in leadership situations in which the staff, which subconsciously knows that the leader is only titular, will pitch a new idea or an initiative or make an argument against something that the leader in name wants to do, but they'll pitch it to someone else beside the leader because they understand that the leader may be sitting on the throne, but the leader isn't the power behind the throne. The leader exists if they are a bystander in name only and really doesn't have organizational influence. That's exactly what's happening if a leader is tolerating a high-performance nightmare. They're not perceived as having the influence or the centrality in the narrative of the organization to do something about that individual. By the way, a sure sign that a leader is a bystander is if you hear them say words like, "I'm the CEO," or "I'm the head of this company." If you need to shout it out or stomp your foot down and say it, then the chances are you're not being perceived that way. You're a bystander in your own myth. The final one is the fool. Anytime even the smartest person steps into a leadership role, it's overwhelming. And I say that having been overwhelmed, stepping into new leadership roles over and over again. You're operating within so many lanes and thinking about so many things. And many of these things are totally new to you, and you just feel like you don't know anything about it. You don't even know how to make a decision about them at all. And so how are you expected to lead with regards to those things? That's totally understandable. One way to deal with that is to say to your staff, "I don't know anything about this topic. I need your guidance, and then I'll make a decision." Is basically to approach the leadership role that you stepped into with humility. But another, unfortunately common approach is to hide that vulnerability with bravado and with domination and an attempt to create a facade of powerfulness. And someone who is doing this, make no mistake, people can see through it. They do. They're playing the role of the fool. Their external behavior is characterized by a desire to win, or showing strength at all costs. They lack both moral authority and credibility, even if they are able to maintain power and stature due to just sheer force of will, at least force of apparent will. And telltale signs of someone behaving in this is that they're willing to sacrifice ethics or the firm team or organizational culture to not have to be vulnerable and to say, "I don't know and I need to learn." Right? And they'd rather throw away so much positive that can happen with the team simply because they don't want to say, "I need a helping hand." The fool almost always faces a reckoning. And when they do, I've seen it happen over and over again, their staff will not back them up. So a classic case of a fool is the leader who says, "I only care about the results." Well, leading involves looking at a lot more than just the results, especially just the results on paper. Or, "I'm too busy to deal with this. I can't focus." Right? That's usually a deflection. And make no mistake, life has a way of making leaders deal with things no matter how busy they are. Again, that's happened to me more than I'd like to admit. Putting it all together, framing your professional narrative as one defined by fear creates a leadership trajectory marked by timidity and decreased performance due to morale issues, quiet quitting, staff departures outright, time wasted gossiping or griping, and then toxic roles, in particular the victim, bystander, and fool, take you out of the professional driver's seat, create a loss of confidence in your leadership, and open the door to ethical lapses and reputational damage, leaving you without allies when you need them the most. So, to change, what do you need to do? The first and most important, and as silly as it may sound, it's true, hardest step is to simply acknowledge this underlying issue and its impact on your ability to lead. And by the way, by not being the victim here and saying, "Oh, it's this person's fault," or it's the circumstances that my company or my team or my own bosses have put me in, but to say, this is my fault. I acknowledge that this is happening, and the onus is on me and me alone. And I alone, with the help of those I care about, have the power to change it. That can be hard because it may involve admitting publicly that you have screwed up. And there's an incredible example of someone who did this and changed the entire trajectory of his company in the book that I have cited here on the slides that are in your supplemental materials. And then, of course, committing to engaging in a growth mindset. In other words, a mindset that is committed to rolling up your sleeves and embracing change and growth, even though it's difficult. Again, a great book on how to do that is provided in the materials. Really, anyone who's interested in leadership should read both of these books. They are powerful. And then internally adjust your narrative and or the type of narrative, the myth that you are living out in your professional life. I strongly recommend that you document your acknowledgement of the problem and your commitment to change in writing. Sometimes I even have clients of mine ritually take that writing and burn it over a flame, almost as a symbolic way of saying goodbye to the way they were. And really, for reasons we're going to talk about later, it's important to additionally say it out loud to your team. Again, as scary and hard as it is, your credibility will actually be bolstered if you sit up and say, I am going to be different than I have been before. And I make that commitment to you as this team that I love and care about, and I want to succeed with me and our organization. And it never hurts to use an accountability partner, a mentor, a coach, a colleague, a mastermind group, and something like that, to make sure that you do these things and you stay on track. They're scary. They can be hard. A lot of people say they'll do them, then they're afraid to move forward. Again, I understand that, but accountability partners can push you to take the actions that you need to. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if a high-performing nightmare has arisen within your team and they have real power and authority and are affecting the team dynamic, they have actually taken away your credibility. How do you rebuild it? First of all, you need to reconnect with your values, both corporate and personal. The high-performing nightmare, by taking away your power, has also made a negative statement to the world about what you value as a matter of organizational culture and as a matter of acceptable behavior. And they've also made a statement as to what you will tolerate. And that's why I felt it was so important earlier to raise those ethical implications of tolerating high-performing nightmares, because really high-performing nightmares in your workplace are an ethical and a reputational issue. What are your real values? Any client that I ever work with, I tell to begin to journal, document, or otherwise record all of the values that they as a leader represent, irrespective, by the way, of what your firm or organization say that they should be, because the way to rebuild your credibility and to become an authentic leader that people genuinely respect and will follow because they want to, not because they're forced to, is if you know yourself. And our values define who and what we are. So make sure that you document those things. If you don't know what they are, that's totally fine. Values only have meaning via the decisions that we make when our values are called into question. And so a way to figure out what your values are, or by the way, to tell yourself or to discover if you are fooling yourself about what your values are, is to make sure that you are particularly observing and documenting how you behave when there are ethical conflicts. What are you doing when an employee is caught lying, even if that employee is high performing? What are you doing if an employee says that they will be at meeting after meeting after meeting and they continually show up late or they don't show up at all? Are you living out values of punctuality, of your staff members living by their word, of your organization being one that values integrity and respect for clients or other stakeholders' time? those real values are going to be established once you document how you behave within certain within situations that test your values. And then you want to rinse and repeat vis-a-vis your organization's value statements if it is an organization that has one. If it's a small law firm, it might not have a value statement yet. That's totally fine. But if you work, for instance, for a major corporation that has a value statement that's posted all over the walls and on the website and everywhere, well, are you living up to that? Are you behaving accordingly? And are your personal values as a leader in alignment with those of the organization? If they're not, then that itself may be causing almost a divided approach or a very fractured approach to how you are presenting as a leader, creating that vacuum for a high-performing nightmare to step in. So you want to make sure that if there's any sort of misalignment, that you begin to move to put it back together. Don't shy away from candid discussions about these things with people that you discuss. Confidants or trusted mentors, spouses. There have been deputies that have worked with me where I have worked with them for so long. We have such a trusting relationship where I've said, look, am I living up to my values here? And sometimes they said yes. And sometimes they've said, Scott, you could be doing a little bit better here. And this is what people are saying about you. That's totally cool. If they hadn't been candid with me, I wouldn't have been able to change. Remember, discussions about values and their transgressions are extraordinarily difficult and painful. Approach them with the spirit of heroism and do not approach them from the role of the victim or the fool. Tie values to purpose. So there is a formula that can help people figure out what their purpose is. And I recommend that every leader do that, because at one point or another, and at one time or another as well in your life, you're going to need to figure out, particularly if your leadership is in crisis due to a high-performing nightmare, well, why am I a leader in the first place? Why did I take this job? Right? Ideally, it should be for a reason other than just money or prestige. And figuring out what that real reason is matters. It's your leadership purpose. Easy thing to figure out. You look at your skills and experience that qualify you to be in that leader from a paper or resume perspective, and then you connect them to the position and how that position serves the bigger picture of your organization. So it's tying together skills and experience to what really matters in the largest possible perspective vis-a-vis your organization. Who are your organization's clients? Why are you there? What problem is your organization solving? How do your skills and experience put you in a position where, as a leader, you can ultimately serve those that your company is there to serve? Once you understand all of those things, you understand your purpose. And then you want to look at the behavioral rituals that you engage in. In other words, what are your fallback behaviors? How do you act when faced with challenges, including the challenge of a high-performing nightmare, and take action to change any that do not further your purpose? So if your purpose is to be able to serve as many corporate defendants in real estate litigation as possible with high quality, well, if your best employees are all leaving because the person bringing in the clients is so abusive to those employees, then your actions as a leader are not aligned with your purpose as a leader within that organization. And it's time to begin to realign. Now, I mentioned earlier, you're going to have to rebuild your moral credibility once you have gone through the exercises that I just mentioned. Anyone can sit up in front of a group and repeat lines off the script about how things haven't worked out. We're not living our values the way we want to, so let's change, and I'm going to change. But the problem with just writing words on a paper and saying them is that if your moral credibility and if your leadership authority has been undermined by the ceding of real power within your team or organization to the high-performing nightmare, people aren't going to believe you. They'll think it's literally just words. And it actually can depress morale even more. So in light of that fact, I recommend that when you decide it's time to make a change, that you not only tell your staff that it is time to make a change by you and in your actions and in your behaviors, and to tell them that as the leader, you are taking full responsibility for things that have gone amok and for leading that change, but to say it with real feeling, to say it with charisma. Charisma, and there is a whole other CLE that I've given for Justia on charisma. I recommend anyone interested on this topic to go to that and learn from it. But in order to be able to communicate with charisma, you need to connect a clear message in your brain, complete with a call to action. Usually, that call to action is for you to take, but it may involve asking the people on your team to hold you accountable. That's a call to action to them, but with a genuine expression of feelings. Ineffectual, weak, or insincere communication will only weaken you as a leader even more. They'll see you not only sadly as disempowered and not fully in control of the ship, but a phony as well. And so charisma, communicating that clear message with a call to action connected to the full range of your emotions, is absolutely essential. When you are preparing this sort of messaging to your team about your commitment to change, focus therefore on developing a message. How the culture of the team or your law firm or your organization has changed, and what it will look like as the changes that you're looking to bring out are actually implemented. The more concrete, the better, right? So don't just say we're going to have an organization in which everyone feels empowered and no one feels abused. You need to say things like everyone will be respected when they share their point of view. No one will throw a notebook at you, right? You will not be spoken over. Yelling will not be tolerated. All of these sorts of things are specifics that can encourage people to believe that you're actually serious about this. Conveying the feelings that the audience needs to see and to feel. And so if the audience or if the people that you're speaking to on your team really need to feel that you're sorry about what you did, it's up to you to be charismatic to say, I know I got this wrong, and I am so sorry. Make sure that your words are conveying that. Even if it makes you uncomfortable, it's going to be a lot more uncomfortable if your overall performance as a leader continues to go down and you are ultimately in a very bad situation, either without a firm or without a job or demoted or any other sorts of things that can happen. From there, you begin to build an action plan to recover your credibility as a leader, to bolster your team's culture, and to deal with the high-performing nightmare. So, what are the goals of a plan? To appropriately address the human crisis that the ongoing behaviors of the high-performing nightmare have created from a people management perspective, but also from a financial, operational, and business impact perspective. So if the person is, for instance, like the example I gave at the top of the hour, a rainmaker, okay, how are you going to deal with the clients that person either has brought in or may be bringing in, or might be in the pipeline, or might theoretically just be out there? And then how will you deal with it if this person is responsible for systems and their departure might create chaos with regards to the ongoing operationalization of the systems that you have in place? And then you also want to make sure, as a second goal, when you build out this plan, that you regain moral and authentic leadership authority, not just titular leadership authority, but real leadership authority that you have because people respect you, by permanently eliminating this particular dysfunction from the firm or the team or the culture. Now, I am clear here about eliminating this particular dysfunction. The way life is, the way team dynamics are, inevitably, you're going to bring someone on or someone who has been on the team already will then begin to emerge with their own set of dysfunctions down the road. No team lasts forever without any dysfunctions, but at least you will not be repeating the same one. And you can use the same process or something very, very similar to deal with other problematic behavioral challenges, and be able to, again, set yourself up to continually regenerate your culture as you repeatedly deal with interpersonal challenges when they arise. So, what are the elements of the plan? There are 5 of them. First of all, most importantly, what is the goal that you have in place for the high-performing nightmare? In other words, what is the specific outcome that you ultimately want to drive them by? Remember that this is driven by your values. That's why we have you examine your values first. It may be that you demote the person. It may be that you transition them out. It may be that you put them on a performance improvement plan. It may be, sadly, sometimes that you terminate them, or it may be that they're cowed by the organizational change and they automatically sort of filter back into being a more well-behaved member of your team. Understand what the goal or goals for this person are in light of who and what they are. And then you want to make sure that you utilize your legal training and or subject matter experts in both HR and employment and, if relevant, labor law to figure out what are the best practices with regards to that goal, and treating it as really from a legal, from an HR and a human management perspective as any other HR decision. Try and make sure, though, that you're separating your emotions from the desired outcome. In other words, don't get personally attached to the high-performing nightmare. Yes, they're a high-performing nightmare, but I like them, or I owe them so much, and I really want to be gentle with them. You want to pull away your emotions. Are you being gentle with them because that's consistent with your values and what your organizational goals are and will ultimately help those that you serve? Or are you being gentle with them because you like them? Make sure that there's real clarity. There's not necessarily a right or wrong here, but you need to have clarity. Similarly, what is the specific goal that you have or a goal that you want to set for your team or your organization's culture, irrespective of what actually happens with the employee? So the goals with regards to the employee ideally will be met. Or if they're not met, some other outcome that is legally and from a people management and organizational culture perspective acceptable. But then leaving that individual aside, what do you want the organizational culture to look like during this transition period, and especially after this issue is resolved? How will you know that your culture has been reset? You really want to take the time to identify success metrics and timeframes for that cultural shift to have happened. You don't, by the way, want to pick these goals because they sound nice or because you should. You want to be honest here. So, for instance, do you want to have an organization where people feel like they can speak up and they can have a sense of fun and play at the job? Some organizations with a lot of creativity or a lot of creative individuals in them may prioritize that, or in which creativity itself is generally reignited. Or do you want an organization where people are really focused more on the tasks that they have? If it's more of a task-driven or linear thinking sort of organization or team that you're running, okay, how do we get people back to that? And then how do we encourage them from an interpersonal and from a psychological safety perspective and a respect perspective to get there? Thinking about how we can identify success metrics. Look, a lot of qualitative data, polls, or surveys or things like that can help identify what those metrics might look like and how you know whether you're achieving them or not. And then you want to have a clear identification as to how these goals, whatever they might be, as well as the actions that you take to implement them, further the purpose that you have both as a leader and that your organization has with and how that all marries with your values that you identified earlier. And if any of those things aren't in alignment, then you want to review this whole package of actions and make sure that they get into alignment. then you want to take the time, effort, and work with whoever you need to put together a step-by-step written pathway to achieving both the employee-centered or the high-performance nightmare-centered goal and the cultural goal that you have set for your organization. So again, this includes standard HR and employment law and relevant labor law protocols for handling people issues. And right, you want to make sure that you, if yelling or stepping over people or looking the other way, if misbehaviors are occurring, have been part of how you and your team operate. Okay, how do we achieve these goals from a step-by-step perspective? What are the specific things that we need to do to move away from that to get to whatever the outcome goals we identified in the prior slide look like? And that's really, again, where HR and legal experts, which presumably as lawyers we all can find, will be able to help you. Make sure that if the high-performing nightmare is a lawyer, or if other roles within the organization shift, or if you engaged in shifts in your own role or how you engage with people, if any of those things happen, make sure that any of the ethical rules regarding terminating, representation, conflicts, or confidentiality are followed. So for instance, if you were a firm owner and you realize, one of the behaviors I need to engage in is stepping away from all of my client litigation and focusing full-time on managing my team and being out there networking so I can bring in clients that the high-performing nightmare is taking with them. That's cool, but then make sure that you go through them, through the relevant ethical canons. Again, I've identified some model rules here that go as to this concerning representation, ending, and how you're dealing with these other issues that are identified on the slide here. All of the steps of the plan, not just the outcomes, but the process, I cannot emphasize this enough, must align with purpose and values. So the goals themselves, of course, need to be aligned with the values that you want your team or your organization to reflect, but the process needs to be there too. The ends do not justify the means. And in fact, ends justifying means has led to high-performing nightmares arising in too many situations. And so you want to make sure that you break any tethering that you might have between, or any lack of tethering between the process that you engage in regarding any changes in your organization and your values and your purpose. And then make sure all of the advisors, the HR legal people that may be giving you options with regards to how you proceed with your plans, understand your purpose and values and are making you recommendations with those in mind, so you don't end up with a process or a plan that is conflicted. Finally, have success systems baked into the plan. Again, an accountability partner will help identify rewards for you or support you and provide you with the psychological rewards that you need. When you are dealing with any sort of variances from the plan, unexpected circumstances occur, make sure that the accountability systems that you have in place are going to keep you moving forward, again, so that you are able to continually move forward with success and that you actually feel the benefits and the psychological high that comes with working on something really hard and putting yourself at risk and then seeing it actually occur. And then make sure that when it comes to communicating the cultural changes and the values that we discussed earlier, that you have methods, means, and actual time frames for communicating them. Don't say, okay, by the end of the year, I'm going to have this communication with my staff about the changes. No, set that in the calendar. Use your accountability partners to keep you in check with regards to that, and make sure that if necessary, they're doing everything that they can to support you, even if it's calling you up 3 minutes before that meeting and saying, look, are you going to say all of this at the meeting? And then checking in with them afterwards to confirm that you did. And then you want to make sure that not only are you using the accountability partner with regards to these communications, but anything else that comes up that is relevant to the changes that you are implementing, whether it means hiring additional staff, maybe shifting around some other staff. And as you communicate all of these things, you can always leverage your charisma as well. So what are the key takeaways? We're coming on the end of the hour. I want to make sure that we have a second to go through everything that makes sense, and then we can get to the questions and answers. First of all, high-performing nightmares create tension between your team or your organization's financial and other business expectations and the ethical and cultural imperatives that will ultimately determine whether your drive towards those key performance metrics are met. This tension presents significant challenges for lawyer leaders seeking to navigate leadership, which is, for reasons we've discussed earlier, extraordinarily complex and hard to wrap our arms around as it is. It's truly overwhelming. And ineffective handling of high-performing nightmares in particular can create a crisis with regards to your reputation, with regards to your credibility, can even raise ethical issues that can conceivably throw your license in danger, and they could even raise compliance or lawsuit situations. And then it not only threatens you, but it can threaten your entire organization. And if you are the head of your organization, it can threaten them both at the same time. And it can lead to career disaster if you're perceived as being a poor leader or ineffective or having tolerated behavior that's unethical or problematic or against your company's values. You can get demoted or even let go. So, high-performing nightmares gain a threshold because the relevant leader is afraid of disaster should they leave, or the leader is viewing their role as a leader through toxic roles that are driving their narrative, things like being a victim, a bystander, or a fool. Acknowledging and understanding these realities and the dangers of the high-performing nightmare as presented will put you in a position where you have an opening to make a change. And then you do that by acknowledging everything that's occurred and embracing a growth mindset and being willing to take the steps to change, including making those steps publicly to your staff. Rebuilding your credibility requires clarification as to your own values, as well as your purpose, which you can identify using the purpose formula, as well as assessing whether those are aligned with your organization's values and purposes, and then developing the charisma necessary to demonstrate to your team and any other stakeholders that you are committed to making the relevant change. And then finally, you want to put together an action plan that deals with the high-performing nightmare, that deals with the culture that has fallen into some decrepitude because of the choices that you have made, and that rebuilds your own credibility as a leader. These cultural changes need to connect to your value and your purpose, and then you need to work with relevant experts to put together a step-by-step plan to take you from where you are now to where those goals that we've mentioned earlier will ultimately take you. And with that, you can survive having had the experience of being the leader of a high-performing nightmare. If you'd like to talk further, you can always email me. My social media handles are listed right next to me here and on the supplemental materials. I also have a QR code for my YouTube channel, which has videos that have all sorts of leadership tips for lawyers as well as other emerging leaders, and a lot of them are directly relevant to anyone that will be watching this webinar. So I hope that you take the time out to follow me as well, and then let me know if you enjoy this material as well as the webinar. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Nina for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing that fresh perspective on addressing toxic employees in the legal field and how addressing it can actually lead to more growth for law firms. So we really appreciate you sharing that. For now, let's go ahead and move on to those audience questions. So if you have any questions for Scott, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of the screen. Scott, it looks like we already have a few. If you want to go ahead and start going through those.
Yeah. What are some early warning signs that a high-performing individual might become a toxic superstar? Thank you so much for asking that. Any time someone new comes in and you start to hear about fights, or you start to see that, or disagreements, if you start to see some sort of social shunning going on, it doesn't necessarily mean that the new person is a toxic superstar in the making, but it means you need to explore it. It could be that the new person is actually receiving the brunt of behaviors that are associated with a toxic superstar that might not have been manifesting themselves in your existing team. Or it may mean that they are that person. If you start to hear complaints, or if stakeholders are suddenly silent when there are mentions of this person, or if you are attempting to assign tasks to other stakeholders in your organization, or from other stakeholders in your organization to a team member, and they start asking for other people, or they're dead silent. If you see bizarre social cues coming back over and over again to this person, that's a sign. Additionally, if in meetings they're interrupting, if they're showing negative body language, if they're impatient, if they're talking over people, all of these are potential signals that the person may have interpersonal skills that can get worse over time and threaten your leadership. What are effective strategies for documenting and addressing interpersonal or ethical issues without alienating top performers? First of all, this is going to depend a lot on what your organizational values are and what the purpose is. You, under no circumstances ever, for instance, want to have documenting and addressing interpersonal challenges in a way that makes you seem like a hypocrite. So, for instance, if you are all about, as an organization, making sure that people, let's say one of your corporate values is transparency, and you do everything secretly behind their back or without telling anyone or without any fair warning, then you're behaving in a way that's contrary to your values, and you don't want to do that. So culture to culture, with you having clarity on that culture and what your purpose is and who you're serving, you really want to work here with the chief people officer associated with your organization. If you don't have one, you want to make sure that at a minimum, if they are engaging in behaviors, you get things like witness statements from a number of different people. You want to make sure that you're documenting, writing down the story of what happened, that you're keeping some sort of log or memo. And then I would take the time, if I'm an attorney, to really go through some of the CLEs that are out there. I'm sure Justia has some about exactly how to document and deal with these sorts of things. A lot of this can vary, again, culture by culture and jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So I am general here, but you want to make sure that you are aligned with values and that you are documenting above all else. And documenting means usually more detail is better. Don't want to generally do it. And I personally recommend that you always do it as quickly as possible after an incident, because memories are more likely to be fresh then. You don't want to do it 5 years later. Like people say, well, why didn't you say anything for the past 4 years? How can I build trust with other team members who may feel undermined by the superstar? That goes as to stating publicly, honestly, and you may want to privately pull them aside too. And with this charisma that we talked about, with intentionally chosen messages, as well as heartfelt, vulnerable feelings, statements that you will change, but it has to be backed up by the plan. So really, to do this, you have got to be able to, number one, make the statement that you understand what happened and that it was wrong, but that you have a plan in place that you are executing. Going back to the concept of accountability, that's a large reason why things like mastermind or leadership coaches or mentorship programs exist, to hold you accountable to do this. Really engaging with and embracing accountability is the answer to this question. Saying I'm going to be accountable and I'm going to have someone holding my feet to the fire and I'm going to commit to having my feet held to the fire is the only way this will happen. But please understand this. We all make mistakes and we all fall. So no one's expecting you to be perfect. But if you say you're going to make a change and nothing happens, you will not regain that trust. It will probably fall even worse to an even lower level than it was before. And what steps should I take if the toxic superstar has strong relationships with senior management, making them difficult to manage? This is very, very context specific. But I will say two things. First of all, this is really where, again, masterminds, leadership coaches, that sort of thing, who you can discuss the context with in a lot of detail, are valuable. This is an investment in your long-term success as a leader. But without just being totally, throwing it off to that, you need to examine why you don't have those relationships with your supervisor. Why have your supervisors gone beneath you and developed a stronger relationship with someone under you than with you? Really, it may be worth having a conversation with those leaders, with your peers, with your colleagues, and or your mentor or coach or mastermind group, but you need to figure that out. That to me is a critical situation, one in which you are potentially in a grave risk of having, if not already lost your credibility as a leadership, of having that leadership credibility be lost down the road. That's a fantastic question, something well worth paying attention to. Thank you for asking it. Are there any other questions, Nina?
I don't see any, and I think we can go ahead and wrap up, but I really appreciate your additional insights, and thank you all to our audience members who sent in those questions. We really appreciate it. We want to thank you for joining us for another Justia webinar. As I mentioned at the top of today's presentation, for all the lawyers here today, I also wanted to remind you about the benefits of joining Justia Connect Pro. If you haven't already, you can go to our Justia Lawyer directory, claim your profile, and then you will be eligible to upgrade to Pro. Once you do, you can gain access to different benefits, including the ability to earn CLE credit, as I just mentioned, for live and on-demand presentations, as well as getting an enhanced directory profile with a Pro badge, the ability to feature peer and client reviews, and access to our $200 Justia Connect Pro credit to save on select marketing solutions. To upgrade or learn more, you can go to pro.justia.com and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next clip.